Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ben, and in this episode of the Smoking Hot Confessions BBQ podcast, I'm chatting with a pitmaster who also happens to be an expert in agriculture and primary production. Hey family, I hope you're well wherever you are and you got that thin blue smoke rolling. This is episode 109 of the Smoking Hot Confessions BBQ podcast. Now, before we get into this, I do want to just throw a couple of announcements out there to you and just get you caught up on where we are and what we're doing. So coming up soon is the Townsville Barbecue Battle in a virtual format this year. So if you've been watching me through the socials, you will have seen that I went up there last year and it was just phenomenal. But of course, 2020 being the wonderful, wonderful sarcasm year that we've had, it's moving into an online format, and they've really thought it out, and it looks really cool. And they're going to be live streaming through their Facebook page throughout the whole day. So they're going to have a live music stage set up, which they'll be live streaming. They've got the competition, of course. They're going to have some cooking demos. Myself, I'll be doing one, and also Chris Davey from Smoking Hot Bros. We're going to be doing some chats with pitmasters with live crosses to their houses, which is actually really cool when you think about it. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So I actually interviewed Dan Wilczewski, who's one of the co-founders of the event, in last week's episode. So if you haven't caught that yet, make sure you jump back after you've listened to this one and catch up on what's happening with that. Now, the key here is to make sure that you like their event page on Facebook. That's Townsville Barbecue Battle on Facebook. Make sure you like that, but also make sure you turn on the notifications for their page. That way, whenever they go live, your phone will let you know and you can tune on in. Now, if you're watching on Facebook, please give this video a like and a share. If you're on YouTube, give us a subscribe, hit that little bell. And if you're listening to the podcast, please give us a rating and a review on whatever podcast app you're using. It only takes a minute of your time, and it really helps us to share the barbecue love for this scene that we're all just absolutely passionate about. So now today's episode, I'm heading down to South Australia. Well, the internet is taking me to South Australia. I'm going to be talking with a pitmaster who's also an expert in agriculture and primary production. His team is one of the hottest on the South Australian barbecue scene at the moment, and they've just released a new range of rubs to the market. So if you haven't worked it out yet, I'm talking with Tom Damin from Smoky Pastures BBQ. Today, we're going to learn about his team and his rubs. We're going to find out about how COVID has affected the beef industry in Australia, which is going to be really interesting. And then we're going to take a deep dive into cattle as a broader topic. So we're going to find out about diet, and we're going to try and put to bed this whole grass or grain-fed discussion. And then we're going to wrap up with a lesson on resting meats, why it's important, and how to schedule it into your cooks, particularly if you're cooking in a competitive team. So without further ado, let's get into it.
This is the internationally awarded Smoking Hot Confessions BBQ podcast with your host, Ben Arnott. How long's it been since your last confession?
Alrighty, Tom, welcome to the confessional, my friend. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me, mate.
Oh, anytime. So tell me, how are you? How you been?
Yeah, good. Quite busy. So work-wise, it's been busy. And yeah, we've been getting ready for the launch of these few rubs, which is becoming a little bit more than a hobby now, which is how it sort of started out. But, you know, lots of cooking. Life keeps sort of ticking along. So, yeah, pretty good.
That's good. And so all this business that's been happening lately with the COVID hasn't thrown you out too much?
Yeah, obviously it takes a bit of adjusting. I think not seeing people regularly is very different. You know, we've missed out on at least 2 barbecue comps that we were going to go to, so that's a bit of a sad one. But you know, me being in agriculture and primary production, my job hasn't really been affected, and my wife's a doctor, so she's an essential worker. So you know, kids have kept going to childcare, and we just have really boring weekends now. So it's been interesting, but obviously a lot of other people have been, you know, much more significantly affected. So
yeah, that's really good to hear, and I'm happy for you. So okay, tell us about Smoky Pastures BBQ. Fill us in on the team.
Yeah, so we're a 2-man operation based in Adelaide, South Australia. Myself and Matthew Knowles. We're just old school mates from high school, and we worked together in the same business. So it was a family business up until about 6 months ago called Pasture Genetics, and we both work out at a research farm. I think he got a rotisserie spit for his 21st birthday. He bought himself a spit as his 21st birthday present, and that's where we first started experimenting with charcoal cooking and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's just something we've been loving for years. And about early 2018, I found out, being the competitive person I am, that you can do cooking as a sport. And with some young kids, just arrived and whatever, and I thought that was something I could do at home. And yeah, we started going hard, basically. So yeah.
And so how many comps do you have under your belt now?
Not as many as we'd like, to be perfectly honest. I think the team's been to about 7 comps.
Okay.
We waited a bit to go to our first one. We sort of went to Fat Drip in 2018 as our first one. And then 2019 we did 4 comps as a team. So trying to mainly get to all the South Australian ones that are easy for us to get to. And then we capped it off in November last year. We went over to Kangaroo Valley, which was unreal. And then we got up in smoke just in the nick of time, really, at the start of this year in Adelaide. And then, the COVID happened. So we were planning on doing all the SA circuit and over to Horsham for meat. But yeah, we'll just have to see if we get another comp in, for the rest of the year. That'll be awesome. But otherwise, just got to keep busy.
Yeah, it's not looking good for comps at this stage, I don't think.
No. I like the sound of those virtual comps. I haven't put my hat in the ring on one of those yet, but they do look like a fair bit of fun. So yeah.
Yeah, I've judged on 2 of them, 3 of them now so far. Actually, there was one over in WA and 2 down in Victoria, down in Melbourne, that I was a judge for. And it's a pretty cruisy gig. I get to sort of hang out and just sort of jump on some Zoom calls, talk to some people, and look at photos and go, oh yeah.
Awesome.
It's pretty cruisy.
Yeah.
And I get to just sit here and just drink beer in my office.
Mate, it's much better than being stuck in a judge's tent. Yeah.
True. That is very, very true. So you've set yourself up as a team. You've got a teammate who's been a long-term friend. How does it go from sort of starting with a spit at a 21st birthday into starting to get into competition barbecue? And I know you've had a few call-ups. You've been pretty humble about that, but I've been to a couple of those South Australian competitions, and I know you've had quite a few good call-ups. How do you sort of transition from that into manufacturing the rubs?
Well, I guess so. When we sort of started the team, like Matt and I, we're both really into animal production, but also just growing your own food in general. We're not like hippies about it or anything like that, but I just I grew up eating a lot of homegrown produce. I come from I'm half Italian, so I come from a bit an Italian background. Mum and dad, we used to do tomato day, and we'd grow our own salads and things like that in the backyard. Have chooks, kill our own chooks and things like that. And I've got a lot of relatives in country South Australia, so I grew up around the country. And I guess I was growing a lot of chilies and onions and garlic and things that you can grow a lot of. But then what do you do with them? So I was already making I was already making heaps of dehydrated spices, so lots of chili powder and things like that. And then barbecue scene came along, and it was probably listening to one of your early podcasts, or just consuming so much barbecue content and people talking about making their own rubs. And then we were just like, wouldn't it be awesome to compete with our own homemade rubs, which we grew ourselves? So that's where we just started dabbling. But then I think once you go down that rabbit hole, you can get stuck pretty quickly. So then I just started buying all sorts of exotic ingredients and researching it. And it just really tickled my fancy in terms of, coming up with your own blend. And then we just really, I just started sharing it with people. I've probably given out a few it'd be close to 100 odd jars of rubs to family and friends, and tweaked it here, got feedback there. And then just serious encouragement from, some good friends in the SA barbecue scene saying, mate, you should think about, selling these. They're good. Guys like Rust from Natural Smoke and Kelly Walduck, who's a really good young butcher in South Australia. And, they've been pestering me basically to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and we'll get these out and put them in the market.
Yeah, cool. Now, you just mentioned Russ from Natural Smoke there. Were you cooking with him when I went to the Adelaide
yeah, he was in our tent. Yeah, he was just hanging out with us really. I've invited him to be on the team heaps of times, but he's a bit of a social butterfly, so I think he just prefers to just be able to, wander off whenever he feels like it to chat to people. So it's a bit hard to nail him down to be a teammate, but yeah, he's a good mate, and we just, it's just one of those friendships that you build in the barbecue scene. He liked what I was cooking. I liked playing around with all these different flavors. I was already cooking in a Kamado, doing a lot of different wood smoking. And then we just got chatting, and then he was just developing his Natural Smoke business. And then he just started throwing different wood at me. I was just testing out everything under the sun to, Jujube and Melaleuca and all this sort of awesome, locally sourced smoking wood that he just needed to find out information about. So, and then ever since then, we've just had, really good friendship. He's a great guy to work with. So,
mate, that's so cool. I think when I came past, it was during the SCA time, and you guys were out there with big old irons. I think. Did you use an iron as a steak press? Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, mate. It was cool. It was searing.
So your rubs, do they still actually have your homegrown chilies and things in them?
Look, they don't. To do it on that kind of scale, I just don't have the capacity to grow as much like raw ingredients as possible. So they're still our exact blends. Although, during the development phase with the supplier, we had to do a couple of back and forths because obviously, as you know, like salt isn't just salt, or cayenne pepper isn't just red chili powder, or, that sort of thing. So we had a few back and forths. To be able to do this, we've gone through a co-packer. Stag & Co, based on the Mornington Peninsula. Yeah, so we're releasing the rubs through those guys, and that's basically allowing us to do it. I've got the time to do the testing and the ingredients and the marketing and all of the online stuff, but the manufacturing and registration and all the red tape associated with that and logistics, I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't do it in a partnership with those guys. So they've been great. They're doing the Butcher's Axe range and the Badass Barbecue range. So it's been really cool, and getting to know those other guys as well has been great. So
yeah, they're really supportive of a lot of the barbecue teams out there that are doing all their rubs and things at the moment. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Like if you're looking at getting into rubs and you don't have a co-packer, you're quadrupling, pentupling the amount of work that you got to do. So the skinny of it is as well is that if I'm buying it in my small handcrafted amounts of raw ingredients, I can't even bottle it up cheaper than you can on a commercial scale. It's just as simple as that. I looked at it and I was like, I'm just causing myself a heap of work here. I'm not really saving any time. What I want to be doing is spending all that time cooking, working on new rubs, developing new flavors. Just quietly in the works is possibly a bacon cure product as well that we want to go down the track with. So, it's a side gig for me. I can't do all that sort of stuff if I'm bottling up jars of rub every night. So, yeah. No. Although if your wife's a doctor, you probably could if you wanted to.
Oh, yeah. Quit my day job. No, I love my day job too much, mate. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. So tell us about the range then. I actually thought that the bacon cure was already out. I thought that was a done deal.
No, I've been using the Misty Gully stuff a little bit, and I did a bacon video with the Misty Gully bacon cure, which is a really good product. Yeah, and that's a good product. I like it a lot, but we just want to put our own spin on it, really, because I've done a lot of homemade bacon since I started down this barbecue adventure. So, I'm keen to offer something a little bit different in terms of a bacon cure. But the two rubs, we've got Risket, which is a SPG based sort of all-purpose red meat style rub, and then we've got Sweet Dreams, which is your sort of typical sweet spicy, a little bit more targeted at white meat and seafood. So sort of covering the most of the proteins in these first two rubs. But we've got a third one in development called Game On, and that is, look, it's going to be good on lamb and game and things like that, but it's like a Middle Eastern influenced spice rub.
Interesting.
And it doesn't just go on lamb and game. Like, I've been using it on chicken. Russ did a focaccia bread with it on it the other night that was unbelievable. And
fantastic.
Yeah, it's just got a lot of really good wholesome spices. Like, we're trying to keep these pretty natural, so no MSG, no sort of artificial flavorings, anything like that. Not that there isn't a place for those. Like, these are definitely more targeted for people using them at home and cooking with them all the time than just winning competitions. There's definitely rubs that are much more designed for competition barbecue. So that's cool.
Yeah, well, that is an interesting point. When you are developing rubs, do you aim for the competition market or do you aim for the backyard market? I was having this discussion with somebody else, and I said to them, listen, we've got 250 teams, four people on a team. There's maybe 1,000 people.
Yeah,
but like 1,000 barbecue competitors in Australia. Now, how many backyard barbecuers are there? And
exactly.
That was the way that I was looking at it.
Yeah, we just didn't we didn't just think about it like that. We just wanted something that tastes good primarily. You know what I mean? But if I think it's more important when you do make the decision to say that this is a competition barbecue rub, it's really got to deliver something pretty high powered and pretty unique. And I think it's almost essential for it to have MSG in it. Like, whether you like MSG or not, I think the comp rubs, you're going to have that, or some sort of really high umami content, maybe some vinegar powder, whatever it is, which could be a little bit off-putting if you put it over a whole roast chicken. But when that judge in the tent is going to have one bite of your chicken thigh, and that's it, it's got to be pretty special. So I think, I think we've just decided to go for something that's going to be, all round, taste good. You can use it at comps. I mean, we've been using the Sweet Dreams at comps for the last 12 months, and we've done all right with it. It hasn't taken out a placing yet, but we've had a couple of shout outs, so a couple of top 10s with it. It's perfectly fine to use in that sort of situation. So.
Yeah, I think you're right onto something there. When it does come to bacon, I love doing homemade bacon as well. I just did a batch about 2 weeks ago, put it through the slicer. Do you prefer to do like a natural cure, or do you put all the nitrites, and all that sort of stuff in it?
So I don't have a problem with using nitrites. For me, it's about food safety at the end of the day, especially if you're doing it at home. Maybe you are more careful than a commercial processor, maybe you're not. But there is a reason why nearly all commercial bacon uses nitrites, and that's for food safety. Because even if you're hot smoking it and cooking it, you won't kill everything. But the nitrites are there to get that last little 0.01%. The sodium nitrite also reacts with the protein in the pork belly and gives it that pink color as well. So, when used properly, nitrites are at an extremely safe level. For me, it's only benefits. I think because if you do, accidentally consume excess sodium nitrite, it can be, a dangerous thing. but used properly, it's no different to using salt, really. It's just, yeah. Obviously, you'd need to have a lot of salt to have the same health effects as, straight nitrites. But yeah, it's as essential in my mind to have that in your bacon cure.
Well, I was about to ask. So, are you trying to tell me that there is such a thing as too much bacon?
No. No way. No way, never. Bacon makes everything better, all right? It's a known fact.
Got a project you'd like to work on with the SHC team? Shoot Ben an email on ben@smokinghotconfessions.com and let's have a conversation.
Alrighty, so in this next section, I wanted to get into cattle and their diets and all that sort of stuff, as you are an expert in agriculture and primary production. But let's start with first things first. What effect has COVID had on the beef industry? Because my understanding is that it's had quite an impact in terms of exports.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, a lot of the export channels, Australia is a net exporter of beef. We produce more than we consume in this country, and export, for nearly all of our agricultural products is really important. But I guess at the end of the day, a couple of things have happened. We've had a combination of restaurants shutting. So a lot of that really high-end beef that's sold by wholesalers has not been going to the restaurants, so it's become available to the public to buy through, not just your secretive back channels, but your everyday butcher shops are getting some really, really premium beef products in now that they normally don't have access to. The other thing is that when COVID came on, obviously a lot more people are buying meat from their butcher shops, whether it's people crazily panic buying mince or whatever it is. People are cooking a lot more from home. So beef consumption's, probably gone up. And that's somewhat compensated a little bit for our losses in terms of exporting to, premium international markets. One thing I will say, so, leading up to COVID, beef cattle prices were at the highest they've been for several years. But a lot of that was to do with the prolonged drought in a lot of the parts of Australia. So, Queensland, New South Wales were coming out of really, really long dry periods, getting some rain in sort of February, March, but, herd numbers are pretty low. If we'd have gone into COVID with a couple of really good years on our backs, with a surplus of cattle, that would have been an absolutely massive disaster. They wouldn't have had any destination to go. Like we saw, 5 or 6 years ago when they sort of stopped trade overnight to Indonesia with the live exports. Whether that was the right reason or not, that's not really for discussion. But at the same time, you got a whole lot of cattle there that now aren't getting fed. They were destined to be processed, and they can't be processed anymore. So you have a big problem. But I think, the cattle prices have dipped a little bit, but they've still remained pretty high because, domestic production's been up. And a lot of it's done in regional areas. Everyone's pretty isolated as it is already. And, food production at the base level, not so much, food service industries like restaurants, but food production is an essential service. So most farmers I know and, cattle growers, cattle buyers, sellers, meat workers and things like that have had it, go pretty consistently since the COVID restrictions. So.
Interesting. Yeah, I pretty much figured that that exports would have been down, and so there would have been more beef on the domestic market. But prices don't seem to have gone down. I thought that that with excess supply, the prices would go down, so people would buy more. And prices in my part of Australia, at least, have gone through the roof.
Yeah, and a fair bit of that's to do with the panic buying and what people are buying. So I brought up mince for an example, before, and I've got good friends who are butchers, and all of a sudden there's a skewed demand for a type of product. Butchers, supermarkets, whoever it is, they're going to try and meet that demand. But when you don't have any more chuck or brisket or trimming to turn into mince, well, the better cuts of beef have to start getting turned into mince. Same thing with lamb, same thing with pork. There wasn't a great excess of supply to begin with. And then when consumption increases 3, 4, 5-fold overnight because people are going crazy buying food, it sort of really puts a strain on an already difficult market. So you got the combination of the value of products haven't really decreased, and then the demand's gone up. So I think we're lucky that we haven't even seen the beef get even more expensive. But at the end of the day, we've still got good supply, and that's what we should be really, really thankful about. I don't think any of the processors or supermarkets or butchers are taking anyone for a raw. They're just their prices are where they have to be.
Yeah, fair enough. It does make me sad though, and sort of I don't know if you heard me gasp before, but it does make me sad when I think about a whole ribeye just being ploughed through a mincer.
Yes. It's not cool. And you know what? It's probably not enough fat for a good mince anyway. So.
Nah, probably not. Not.
People going crazy. I tell you what, I'll tell you this right now. When the panic buying started, or when I started buying up meat, I wasn't buying mince. I was buying Scotch fillets, because I'm like that. If there's going to be a meat shortage, I want to be able to grab a steak out of the freezer. Whenever I feel like a steak. So I was like, well, butchers are going to be selling out and supply is going to dribble up. I'm more worried about my steaks than my mince filled with spaghetti bolognese. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Plus, you can use them for currency once they run out.
Yeah, it's like a gold brick, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They do say that that a lot of people hide their riches in their freezer. So
no,
there you go.
I hadn't heard that one yet, but I do have a little bit of.
Maybe that must.
Mayor station in my freezer at the moment, so it's probably similar.
Fair enough. Yeah. So just bringing it back to barbecue, let's talk about cattle and their diets and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
There's a few questions that I want to hit first. What is the best breed of cattle for barbecue?
Oh, mate, that's such a highly contentious question.
I know, that's why I brought it up.
I don't think there is necessarily. Well, I guess let's start with: are you talking competitions or home cooking? Competitions. Wagyu is very popular because of the meat profile, the meat structure in that particular animal. Because you're looking at single bites, very small tastings, and wow factor. Home cooking wise, I love Wagyu, mate, but I don't want to sit down to a steak of it, any more than once every month, because it's just so rich. You can only eat so much of it. So, yeah, I don't know, but what I'll probably caveat that with is, in my mind, I think looking at good suppliers and good reliable brands is a better option. Simply because when you are buying sort of any beef, the breed is, to me, less important as the supplier or the supply chain, because you can have unlabeled Wagyu beef. Yeah, it might have come from a Wagyu cow, but you don't know the region it was produced in. You don't know the background behind the herd genetics. You don't know what the diet was. It's Wagyu. They're marketing it because of the type of cattle. But, a branded Wagyu product that the history behind, that where it's produced and comes in a consistent quality is going to be, much more reliable than just buying on, whether it's Wagyu or Angus or Shorthorn or Brahman or whatever. I think looking at quality suppliers is where I'd start,
Yeah, good advice there. I know sometimes I go to the butcher and I see Wagyu packaged in a steak, and I look at it and I go, yeah, I don't know if that is Wagyu. It doesn't really look like Wagyu. It must be pretty lean Wagyu.
Look, and here's the thing, definitely could be Wagyu, but what goes into those cattle is just as important as the breeds. Just because you don't have, you have a Wagyu cow doesn't mean it's going to have crazy intramuscular marbling. There's still a lot of variability in the quality of the cattle based on feed source, production techniques, and genetics. So Wagyu is a breed, but different Wagyu herds are using different stock genetics, and the genetics of those individual specific herds can make a big difference. So yeah, it could be Wagyu, just not very good Wagyu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure where to start then. Should we start with diet or should we start with genetics?
Oh, either. Well, while we're talking about breeds, we might as well stick with genetics.
Yeah, cool.
And I think the cattle industry, one of the most overlooked factors is how much is invested in the genetics of the breeds of cattle. Some breeds have risen to more prominence. Say Angus, for example, has been on the rise, extremely popular for probably the last decade, and that's because of a couple of reasons. One is marketing. At the end of the day, nothing wrong with a bit of good marketing. But two, a lot of the Angus producers have focused extremely carefully on the genetics of their herds, selecting cattle with more regular high marble scoring, quicker, more rapid weight gain, better feed conversion weights. So getting more bang for your buck with what you're putting into the cow, resulting in live weight gain. Because at the end of the day, these animals need to perform in the paddock on what they're supplied to produce you good beef on the plate. So, a lot of these bigger breeds have obviously investiture within their own breed societies and within groups of animal producers that are, sharing or selling or developing the genetics. It's very, very technical stuff, and I'm the plant guy, so I start at the feed base. My speciality is in the pastures, so I can't speak in ridiculous depth about genetic profiling and everything like that. But it blows me away whenever I see talk to the animal genetics guys. It's seriously high tech stuff.
I did just have one question, and look, it may be a completely silly question. You mentioned that they will breed the animals based on a consistent marbling score.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't they only find out the marbling score after the animal's been processed?
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you how, Ben, because this doesn't happen with sheep. This doesn't happen with pigs. Not all the animals in the supply chain. Every single Australian produced cattle is electronically ID'd. And from that electronic ID, that means they know the kill weight, they know the carcass, and they can so they can get the information of that cow's genetic history. So, what bull semen was used, what heifer it calved from, and then they can look at what that resulted in: weight on the hook, marble score, meat density, all these different factors, and they translate them into what's called estimated breeding values. And it's basically a consistent scoring profile for the genetic quality of that particular cow. So, for example, a lot of the herds are artificially inseminated these days. Or when you're producing your main breeding cows, you're often actually purchasing bull semen. Not every cattle producer will use their own bulls, and AI is also generally more reliable for conception anyway. So these people are paying really big money for really good quality genetics, because it's one of the most important factors in being a successful cattle producer is making sure that you've got the genetics of your herd in the right place.
God, there's so many questions to ask there. So
I know, man. I know. It's crazy stuff.
So they've got these electronic tags.
Mm-hmm.
They tag the genetic history of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
So after it's been processed, they can evaluate the meat on the hook, and obviously then they choose from the offspring that animal has already produced to then breed future generations.
No, they just look at the parents. So you can go and trace back to one bull and look at the performance of all his progeny. and then his performance is based on that of his progeny. So
Right.
then you just use that bull again.
You just go back to the source.
Yeah. So you pick the best bull, and then maybe when you find the best cow, the best heifer to pair with that bull, and you need to sort of replenish or look for improvements in your breeding stock. Then, if you think you've got yourself a good bull on your hands, you try him over a bunch of different females and assess the quality of the progeny there. So let me put it to you this way: there's some pretty handy bulls out there that have gotten a lot of four-legged ladies knocked up in their lifetimes. Like, some of them are quite prodigious. And I think, in fact, I heard something like nearly every single full-blood Wagyu cow can be traced back at one point in time, thousands of years ago, to one original bull.
Really?
But, we obviously haven't been able to capture that genetic data over those thousands of years, but now they definitely do capture that genetic data.
Wow. Okay. So not to oversimplify things too much, but is it a matter of you look to the bulls for things like predicting how much weight and how much meat those particular cows will create, and the heifer is less important, or is that oversimplifying things too much?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, in terms of the heifers, often they're selected for slightly different characteristics, like their ability to have calving, ease of calving. So that's another breeding value that gets looked at. How easily do they calve down? Are there problems with birthing and things like that? So you want heifers that are going to carry calves well and calve down easily. And at the end of the day, it is like it is with anything. If they're not performing, or if they they have one season and the progeny aren't deemed to be successful, well, they're your older cows that probably get turned into burger meat. But it's definitely going to be something that you try and keep fairly consistent. The thing is that one bull can basically artificially inseminate a lot of cows, but not the other way around. She's only going to calve down once a year. So
yeah, right. Of course. Yeah. So from what you've been saying, it sounds like the cattle industry has kind of looked at the horse racing industry and sort of borrowed a lot of the ideas and the concepts from them. Is that the way it's heading, or is that just my layman's take on it?
Look, Ben, this is not new stuff. They've been, this is just modern animal husbandry. It's been happening for thousands of years, just by farmers doing it by eyeball and just using their gut instincts. Now we can, track it on a spreadsheet and do all sorts of fancy data crunching and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it's been a very important factor for a long time, and in particular in pure bloodline cattle herds where they're all full blood and the breed of one, the genetics of one single breed. So
I'm going to hit you with a bit of a personal question. For myself, personal question for myself, not a personal question for you.
That's okay.
So when I was growing up on a farm, Murray Grey was the brand, or the breed, I should say. And we actually had a Murray Grey bull at one stage. He was just muscle on top of muscle. He was just a complete axe of an animal.
Yeah.
But now everyone seems to talk about Angus, and you never hear about Murray Grey anymore. Is that just marketing, or is Black Angus consistently producing better meat than the Murray Grey?
Probably a serious combination of the two. Look, Murray Greys are pretty sort of resilient cattle, and they still have their place. Like, there's quite a lot of breeds there that are out there. They're smaller in number, but Australia's got some pretty harsh environments for grazing animals, and some breeds tend to do a little bit better in areas of lesser quality pastures or things like that. Interesting you say about Murray Greys, because they actually originated as a cross between an Aberdeen Angus and a Shorthorn. So
oh, really?
They're what's called a stabilised breed, but they actually originated as an accidental cross between two species. So they're at the essence half Angus anyway.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. All right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
Yeah.
So let's swing it back to your wheelhouse a bit. You said that you're the diet man for cattle. Tell us about how important it is. What's the best thing for them to eat? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't do the dieting, like I'm not an animal nutritionist, but what I do is I recommend pastures. So I recommend for them, I guess, what farmers should grow to provide, I guess, the raw materials for the animals to be consuming. And I guess it comes down to a range of different things, you know. When you look at cattle, they're what's called a ruminant animal, so they have more than one stomach. So feed quality is a pretty important factor because, you know, monogastric animals like ourselves, or, you know, dogs, cats, horses, you know, most other mammals are monogastric, as in they have one stomach. We can sort of gorge ourselves or go through starvation periods, eat. No, I know. I prefer not to as well. I'm much more in the pro-eating camp. But, you know, we're foragers, and we look for, you know, foods with high caloric indexes and high digestibility as part of how we've evolved. But with cattle, the way their stomachs are configured is to process a feed source with a very, very high fiber content. And they actually go through a fermentation process in their foregut, where bacteria break down the cell structure so they can extract the nutrients from the fibrous feed sources, you know, like grasses and things like that. But the limiting factor to that is it takes time. So cattle can only consume on average about 3% of their body weight per day in feed.
Wow.
So when it comes to having quality feed, you can have grass that just grows that has, you know, our equivalent of the nutritive value of cardboard, or you can have good quality grass or mixed with legumes, and, you know, it has the you know, a much higher, you know, well-balanced nutritional value. Both of them are probably going to pass through the animal in the same amount of time. So if you're blocking up this animal with poor quality feed, and it's taking all this effort to digest it, yet there's really no nutritive value in there, you're not going to get weight gains on your cattle. So it's important to have, for my role is to help growers choose what pastures they can grow in their climatic areas, because we've got a very diverse range of climates here in Australia. So you grow a very diverse range of different species. But to best suit what they can produce in terms of the feed base for their animals in their environment. So things that you need generally in terms of a pasture base for cattle sort of varies depending on what stage of their growing cycle in their lifespan that they are. So you need very, very high quality food for young animals to carve down on, because they're usually carving down with their mothers, and so their mothers are lactating. They need a high value feed source to go along with it as well. Then you go through a bit of a period where probably high quality pasture is not as important, because the animal's going through, you know, our sort of the equivalent of our prepubescent phase, where we're actually building a structure on the animal. So you're building up the frame, the skeletal structure, and everything like that, just to carry all those muscles. And then, because we like to have our nice marbled steaks and big cuts of meat and everything like that, they go through into what's called a finishing phase. And usually that finishing phase is where a lot of grain and very digestible, but high in protein and high in carbohydrate food sources get introduced into their diet, because you want to create like an excess of energy, which then gets converted into fat, and that's what gives that marbling.
Interesting. So if we're judging it by intramuscular fat in steak,
Mhm.
because that's where most people think of it in terms of like their ribeyes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What I guess I realize you just said that it gets very specific by breed and region, all that sort of stuff.
Mm.
Are you able to give us a bit of a general idea of what they should be eating in each of those phases? So in the junior phase, they need 30% grass, 20% legume. Like, is it broken down like that?
It is. It sort of depends. Like if it's a pasture paddock where they're out actually physically grazing it, you definitely want to have a good legume component in there. It's a highly digestible protein source. But a good grass base is also important as well. I guess in some operations you can't always provide that year round. So that's where things like growing feed to store as hay or silage become really important because for example, if you're a dryland cattle operation in country South Australia where 5 months of the year it just doesn't rain, they can grow and have a fair bit of dry feed, just hayed off in the paddock, which is still reasonably good quality. But once that's gone, you have to start feeding out hay, and you grow a bulk of that in the end of winter and spring when we've actually got moisture available. So, the diet can sort of change from day to day, but you're usually focusing on, somewhere between 30 to 40 non-digestible fibre in a mixed ration. And it really sort of depends from they're in or they're out. If you have a large legume component, you probably don't need to supplement with as much grain in a ration feeding situation. But if you've only got mainly a grass component, you can supplement with a little bit more grain or some oil seed or something like that. It's higher in protein.
I see. So I gather then from what you've been saying there that if I were to ask you what was better, grass fed or grain fed, you'd say a mix.
Well, even most of your grass-fed beef spends at least a period of its time being finished on grain, or will at some stage have a small grain supplement into their diet, like throughout the year or throughout the animal's lifetime. I think it only has to be about 80% of the feed source has to be straight pasture.
Interesting.
And at the same time, even grain-fed or grain-finished beef doesn't necessarily spend its entirety of its life on straight grain. It's usually a component of their total diet. I mean, if you, for example, just fed cattle straight grain with no roughage, it'd be like a human being just eating chocolate only.
Doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, I don't know.
Actually, chocolate gives me migraine, so I don't want that.
No, I'd give most people about a week eating straight chocolate, and I reckon you'd be pretty sick of it.
Yeah.
In terms of what it does to the digestive system and everything like that, you need a real balance. And I guess this is one of those. This is one of those reasons where I sort of swing back to what we spoke about earlier about producers and brands. For me, I'm not 100% sold on either grass-fed or grain-fed. Look, they definitely have some key attributes that you get in some instances where, you have a significant characteristic of one or the other. Like your grain-fed or grain-finished beef generally tends to have that whiter coloured fat and a higher marble score. But that's mainly because when you grain feed, you're generally going to get a higher marble score. You're conditioning the animal in that finishing phase to have a higher marble score. And the white fat is generally from feeding grains like barley or wheat. And it's preferable in certain markets around the world. Whereas pasture-fed animals, often they have a bit less marbling. That's because they're often killed younger. So they don't necessarily always get the time to develop that marble score in that finishing phase. They finish up on the pasture, and then instead of going into a feedlot, or maybe they do go into a feedlot, but for only 30 days instead of 150 days, and then they still get to get called pasture-fed beef. So, they don't necessarily get the time to produce that marble score. They have that yellowier coloured fat, which is from their diet. So grass-based pastures and some grains like corn that contain high levels of beta-carotene. So it's a B protein that is stored in the fat when consumed in excess. And that's what gives that, slightly yellowish hue to the pasture-fed beef. But really, taste-wise, you can achieve really high-level marble scores on pasture-fed beef. It's just very difficult to do 12 months of the year around growing pastures. Like I said, the quality of the pasture changes throughout the year based on the climatic conditions. To get a really reliable, consistent product, you really have to be doing supplemental feeding if you want to supply a product 12 months of the year. So, I don't think you can label the all pasture-fed beef in one bucket and all grain-fed beef in another bucket. If you go to a individual supplier or brand level, you'll have much more of an idea on the specific diet and what they mean by saying grain-fed or pasture-fed. You can look into it, you're going to spend your $50 plus a kilo on some pretty hot steak. You may as well do your research about the brand that you're purchasing and what the feed source is for their animals.
You're listening to the internationally awarded Smoking Hot Confessions podcast with massive barbecue nerd Ben Arnott.
All right, so we've established that you're quite the man in the know of what happens at the start of the cow's existence. Let's talk about the very end of the cooking phase now. Let's go right to the other end. So I thought that it might be nice if you share some tips with us about resting the meats after you finish cooking them. So we're going right to the other end of the scale.
Yeah, look, there's obviously most people know that, after you finish that cooking process that you should rest your meat. A lot of that is to do with moisture retention and letting that moisture be absorbed back into those muscular fibers that have tensed up during the cooking process. When you rest the meat, it allows those muscular fibers to relax and the moisture to be retained back into the meat. But one little angle about resting meat that I really wanted to bring up was just a little hot tip for people cooking at home mainly and more so than competitions. And that is, I don't know about you, Ben, but I've got some fussy people in my family that always need to eat at an exact time. Like if you said dinner was at 7 o'clock, I want meat on the table at 7 o'clock, right? And we all know that when we're cooking a brisket or cooking pork or whatever it is, these low and slow cooks, they don't always necessarily go to clockwork. So, a lot of the time you'll be resting your brisket or your pork butt or whatever for about an hour anyway. If you have it wrapped in a couple of layers of foil under a towel in an esky, you can realistically rest that thing for up to 4 hours. And so I usually like to build in a fair bit of resting time into my cooks. So if I'm going to cook a brisket, I'm familiar with my smoker at home. I know it takes about 8 hours to do because I'm wrapping it. I want to try and work out that's going to come off my smoker about 2 hours before I'm going to eat instead of 1. And then that way, if it takes a bit longer, I've got room to move. If it finishes up a bit shorter, I know I can still rest it for longer. Either way, that's one of the best things that I've sort of worked out in terms of this whole low and slow cooking. When everyone asks you, whenever you start doing content, first question is always time and temp. And if I want to eat at 6, what time should I put my brisket on? And I always say, go back 2 hours and then work back your cook time from there. So yeah, that's my little hot tip.
Yeah, you mentioned there the idea of wrapping it in foil and then towels and putting it in a dry esky. That's one of the things that I came across a little while ago, and that has saved my bacon heaps of times.
Yes.
Because, there will be times where things come off early.
Yes.
And
sure.
It'll be 3 or 4 hours early, and then you're like, well, what do I do with this now? people aren't going to be here for another 2.5 hours.
Oh, yeah, especially
double foil, double towel, dry esky. It'll hold temperature for ages.
Yeah, it's great. Like you just keep it in that nice, insulated environment. And if you don't have a dry esky around or whatever, obviously not with it switched on, but you can put it in the oven or in the microwave. They're both actually quite insulative. Just don't turn them on, obviously. But if you just need a box to put your meat in, then you can use what's found in every kitchen, basically.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, look, that's probably a good place to start to close out this episode. So the studio's yours. Let's have you throw out some thanks and some shout outs and tell everybody where they can track you down on the socials.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Smoky Pastures BBQ, and that's Smoky with no E. That's a very common one. I don't really know which is the correct spelling, but we went with no E. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and we've got a YouTube channel. We're trying to bring out content sort of as regular as we can, but it's really about helping you do all sorts of cooking at home. In terms of shout outs, shout out to the whole South Aussie barbecue scene and our Facebook group. I reckon it's one of the best barbecue Facebook groups going around in terms of positivity and encouragement. Thanks to Matt, my teammate. And I said I'd give Russ a shout out from Natural Smoke. I already think I did earlier in the episode. And another good guy to keep an eye on in South Australia is Aaron Palmer from Low and Slow Basics. He's got a bit of a ripping YouTube channel going on as well. So, but other than that, yeah, thanks for having me on, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Mate, thank you. I'll have you back again anytime.
Good on you, Ben. Thank you.
And there you have it, family. That was Tom Damin, the Pitmaster of Smoky Pastures BBQ and an expert in agriculture and primary production. So we've had a really deep dive into the world of beef and cattle and hopefully clarified a few of the things for you on that never-ending grass grain-fed beef thing. And how good was that little tip at the end for resting meat at the end? I got to tell you, double foil towel dry esky works every time. So make sure you jump on their website, follow them on the socials. He does have that cracking YouTube channel that he was talking about before. There's some really nice content over on there. Go over there, give them a follow and hit that little notification bell for them as well. And while you're at it, if you have enjoyed today's show and you're listening on a podcast app, please take a minute and leave a rating and review for us. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit subscribe and ring that bell for notifications. If you're watching on Facebook, give us a like and a share. And if you're watching on IGTV, give us a heart and a follow as well. We really appreciate it. And so that's all we have for you for today. So until next time, take care of each other and keep on queuing.
Thanks for listening to the Smoking Hot Confessions podcast. Head on over to smokinghotconfessions.com for recipes, tips, and Ben's own confessions.